Hello everyone. This is your component for Indian philosophy component for your environmental studies. Um, and I will be just very briefly talking about the relevance of Indian philosophy in terms of the environmental ethics. We can cover very briefly of very few things, and I expect you to be reading also a couple of articles which will give you the details. It's not possible to go through each and every part of the reading or section of the reading that I have given for prescribed for this component, but yet I'll just very briefly just sort of try and explain a little bit of the problems. Now, precisely what we are looking at is the the problem of nature, the environment of nature. Now, problem word is very important here because we are looking at the philosophical approaches, which is to say that, that is to analyze the idea of nature, analyze the idea of environment, and so on and so forth. Um, so if we look, for instance, in one of these Puranas, there is this one small verse which says, so long as the earth is able to maintain mountains, forests, and trees, until then, the human race and its progeny will be able to survive. Now, this is also true that lots of people in South Asia or India or Indian subcontinent use this Puranic verse in their daily prayers. But it is important to kind of pay very keen attention to the idea that what is being said here. I mean, you use this small verse as a prayer, but what do we really mean by that? That's one side of it. The other side of it being that if we are reciting this verse or if we know the meaning of it and so on and so forth, then do we really, are we really aware of the problem that is just being, said in the verse? Or, for instance, the idea of the applicability. Do we really follow the idea that is being said here in this verse? That's what it would mean to problematize the idea, to philosophize the idea in some sense, right? So now, largely, the question is that we as humans, and we are talking here as humans in this universal sense, when we are talking about being sensitive about environment, it's not about you, me, and or he or she alone. It's about the whole universe in a sense, whole Earth, our planet particularly, right? So of course, we all are aware that on everyday basis we interact with nature or all components of nature, and we have a very delicate and sensitive relationship with nature, for instance. And nature here would mean, say, for instance, we drink water every day. Where is water coming from? We have food every day. Where is food coming from? And so on and so forth. Now, many of these resources are generated by nature for us. So, in a way, directly or indirectly, our survival depends on nature. That human survival is directly or indirectly dependent on nature. Now, the question also would come indirectly this that in that idea of relationship that we share with nature, um, what is the sense of duty that nature has towards us, knowingly or unknowingly, as far as nature is concerned? And what is the sense of duty that we have or should have or ought to have towards nature? How sensitive, how empathetic we are towards nature. Now, this I'll briefly also describe when we go ahead, because we'll be talking about the idea whether nature is, I mean, conscious or not conscious in the sense that sentient or insentient entity and so on and so forth. So that becomes an important component somewhere in the as a fundamental idea. Or the question, how do we as humans behave towards our natural environment? Do we bear any responsibility or sense of duty towards our nature, that we call it our nature? And so if it is our nature, what is the sense of duty we should have towards the nature itself? But specifically, we are coming because we are talking about Indian philosophical approaches that we can just very briefly touch upon. So the idea would be that is it that in the history of philosophy that has developed in South Asia or India or Indian subcontinent, have there been approaches developed over a period of time, theoretically or in practice, for instance, which show or display to us that, how sensitive, for instance, a human has been towards the nature, right? Now that sensitive approach towards the nature is something that, if there are models like that, for instance, do we learn something from that? What is it that we ought to learn? Is it that we already have forgotten something about it? Or that's why the question, how and why did they develop these models, if they did develop at all, such concerns, how did they develop? And what do we learn from such concerns in history of South Asia, right? Have South Asians developed structured models of thinking through nature or the natural environment? In other words, have they problematized or philosophized the idea of nature that may help us develop models of sustainability, where we can think of having nature, economy, society, in a certain tranquility, working together. You know, that's somewhere the idea, in a sense. Now, just to give you a small quotation, just to give an idea, which is kind of a very in a sense perennial and a reoccurring theme in what in Indian philosophical discourse. And I'll read this text first, and then we can talk about it. Ancient Indian theistic systems shared a substantial commonality of conceptions concerning nature, seen as a phenomenal reflection of God's essence. The forms of nature are regarded as rooted in God, the transcendental creator, and the various types of existence phenomenally produced by nature are seen as multifarious reflections of divine qualities. The beings of the world are considered as emanations from the transcendental unity of God, from where they come and whence they are due to return. Now, what do we understand by this one idea? You would come across, of very, I'm sure you already know about this popular school in Indian philosophy called Advaita Vedanta. And this quotation you would see that it resonates very much with this idea that is prevalent in Advaita Vedanta, that maintains that, from absolute point of view, whatever there is, and it includes just everything, whatever there is basically, let's say, God, or what they call Brahman. So in a sense, it is a unitary principle, right? It comes out of the, yeah, that unitary principle, like what we see around us. It comes out of that unitary principle, and eventually it merges back with that unitary principle. Now, there are two problems here. From one point of view, if you say, and we are talking about the Advaita Vedanta, if you say that the whole cosmos, let's say, everything, whatever that there is unitary principle, is Brahman, then there should be no distinction between X and Y, which means that I should, if for instance, I love my book, I should also be loving, my the plants in my garden. Um, because there is, from one point of view, then there is no difference. It's all the same. Now, from another point of view, we also run into problem, because Advaita Vedanta at the same time maintains that this, what appears to be to us as humans, it is mere appearance, in the sense of it is illusion. Now, do we mean by that that whatever that there is that appears to us as humans, let's say all the environmental entities that we have, plants, rivers, mountains, trees, all the greenery on whole planet, it is all illusion? Now we run into a problem here. Of course it is not. We are sustained. The reality is, if you talk about the empirical reality, the reality is that we as humans are sustained because what we get from nature. We drink water. We have all our almost resources, raw resources coming from vegetation around us, and so on and so forth, from the environment. We breathe air, we breathe fresh air, and so on and so forth. So how does a philosophical school like Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, um, you know, try to try to understand and interpret the idea of nature? Or if we have to I mean, implement these ideas of Advaita Vedanta vis-a-vis anything that is environmental ethics, for instance, do we run into problem? Is it a sustainable model for us? Is it not? And so on and so forth. That becomes really important. You will see also that, there are later non-dual models, non-dual philosophers who talk about, as we will just come across the idea of sentience and insentience from the Sankhya school point of view, the consciousness and matter idea. Um, the problem there would be that whether whatever we have around us, be it anything, because now we're talking from a philosophical point of view, be it anything, is it a conscious entity or is it an inert entity? To say that, is it insentient entity? So for instance, I have my books around me, I have my phone around me, and so on and so forth. Is it conscious or not conscious? Um, Now, a lot depends on what we understand by the idea of also sentience and insentience, or the conscious and not conscious, and so on and so forth. Remember, one very important thing which helps to understand these ideas is just in one line, the idea of realists and idealists. Now, realists are the philosophers who believe that the anything outside the mind that you come across or see, or the perceived reality, um, it really exists bereft of the fact whether the knower, in the sense of the one who is perceiving, who is knowing the reality, exists or doesn't exist. So the question would be, for instance, that if I am if I'm looking at my phone right here, and this phone is outside the domain of my mind, let's say the conscious entity that my mind is. So whether right now I die or I lose my consciousness, the question is whether phone is there or is not, in very crude terms. So realist's question answer is that it very much continues to be there. It doesn't matter whether you know the phone or not know it. It will continue to be there. So you can expect the diametrically opposite understanding of an idealist, in the sense, as opposed to a realist, saying that it doesn't really matter, if I'm not knowing the phone, whether the phone is there or not there, how does it really matter? Because phone in itself is not a conscious entity. So that when I say that phone is not a conscious entity, that would mean to ask the question, does phone know itself? Does phone have the capacity and capability of knowing itself? Does it have its own knowledge? Is it aware of itself? Now, as opposed to me, yes, I am aware of myself, but phone is not, right? So do I call phone an inert entity and I call myself a conscious entity? Is that the distinction between the being sentient entity and insentient entity? Now, why does this become important is because, y- you know, the things around us, say, for instance, Taking the example of earth or water, are these conscious entities or are these not conscious entities in terms of, let's say, sentience or insentience? You may argue, for instance, uh, you have all vegetation coming into being because of earth. Now, it is earth that, you know, provides sustenance to all vegetation. So how can you say that earth is not conscious itself, right? I mean, there might be another argument given by another set of philosophers saying, but does earth know itself? Does earth have its own understanding of itself, and so on and so forth? Now, some scholars may say that, well, I mean, earth can be a cause for generating consciousness, conscious entities, for instance, like, let's say, plants, if they are conscious entities, but earth in itself is not conscious. Um, in that sense, then, do we say earth is matter without sentience, or is it a matter with sentience, for instance? No. So now this becomes important. Why? Because see, the idea of sentience and not sentience here is not only important with respect to the earth itself. It is important from this point of view that, let's say, for instance, I think the example would be, if I hurt someone, let's say I have a stone in front of me, or I have phone in front of me, I'm trying to beat my phone, or my phone falls. Okay, it breaks, but does it feel any pain? Does it feel I'm dropping my own phone down on the floor? Does it get hurt? Does it retaliate back to me saying that, why did you break me? Why did you throw me down? I got hurt. No, phone doesn't do that. But if you do that to another person, say for instance, whether it is my friend or not friend, and I throw someone on the ground, they would either retaliate back, or they would just ask me the question, why did you push me down? Um, Now, of course, because they are conscious entities, they're thinking entities, they're social entities, they're psychological entities. That's why they are asking this question. The point would also be that, you see, for instance, I don't want to hurt my friend, and I don't want that my friend should be hurt by anyone else either, right? I have a certain shared responsibility, a certain feeling that I have, a certain conscious, the idea of the conscious being sharing that consciousness with my friend, right? I'm like, okay, I feel your pain, you shouldn't have been hurt, or you're hurt, I can really feel your pain, and so on and so forth. Um, Now, that's precisely the question, that whether you want to see the elements around us, the entities, the environmental entities, the nature around us, you want it to be hurt in that same sense. And that's why the point of sentience and insentience comes in, the point of conscious and not conscious comes in, no? Um, if it is not merely the question that, like, I take a lump of earth and I start beating it up and it doesn't feel pain, and so on and so forth. It's a question that whether I should feel a shared responsibility, a shared consciousness towards the entities in my natural environment um, that selflessly generate sustainability towards me. Now, what is my responsibility? And there is where the question of ethics comes. What is my duty and my responsibility towards nature, towards the environment that I'm a part of, that I live in? You know, be it rivers, be it sea, be it ocean, be it any, trees, for instance, jungles, forests, and so on and so forth. Um, or be it indirectly, that, say, for instance, in terms of what efforts am I making that, I should try and use as less paper as possible, because indirectly that will, of course, affect the, whether forests are being cut or not, and so on and so forth. Now, from another point of view, well, I'm referring to the slide here. I'm saying that one way to analyze this is also to philosophize the sustainable practices around us for conserving an ecological balance. One example could be studying the social-religious practices around us. Like, for instance, you have examples of in our everyday life, trees being worshipped, nature, many natural elements being worshipped, and so on and so forth. Now, what does it mean when you worship them? The idea of worship, to invoke that sacrality into these elements, this idea of Panchamahabhutas and so on and so forth, what does it really mean? The air god, the water god, the ocean god, the tree god. Why have they been given the status of sacrality, status of gods, right? I mean, the idea in some sense, of course, that you don't commit profanity towards the sacred ideas, right? Or from another point of view, simply, if we approach theoretically, to also understand, for instance, that in classical Indian philosophy, the words like prakriti, nisarga, and etc., how have they been interpreted? What do they really mean? So I'm referring here to this one work by Meera Bendur. You can see sections in there, you can read, and there are interpretations about, for instance, in how many different ways can we interpret these ideas of the naisargika, the very natural means what, the prakriti, the nature means what, and so on and so forth, right? And the question of duality between the sentient and insentient principles will be raised. Is nature sentient or insentient entity, that I already tried to talk about. Um, and I think most of it I have already talked about in some sense. The question will also be that if Earth is another conscious being, then I expect that I should behave with the Earth in the same way as with any conscious being, for instance, my friend. If I do not expect my friend to be in pain or problems, I should not expect the Earth to be in problem either, right? Here is the question of ethics. How should I be behaving towards the conscious entities around me, right? And I think that's the fundamental question that Indian philosophy as a whole, I would say, asks, that how how is it that, from ethical point of view, are we supposed to be behaving, um, and also generating the practices of dutiful behavior towards our surrounding, which are otherwise very sensitive. You see, that's an important part. You do also see there could be different models, like the model of the Indian realistic school. When I talked in some point of time about realistic and idealistic models of philosophy, I was also referring to the realist model, for instance, of the Naiyayikas, the Indian logicians, who would talk about the whole. They have tried to define the whole cosmos or whole universe or whole set of realities in terms of being and not being, what they call the bhava and abhava. And that's what they call padartha. Now, padartha here means something that has the capability of being. That is to say, it has a capaciousness, the what in Sanskrit they would call shaktata, where the shakti or sustainability is just a very grounded idea in that idea of being and not being. Even not being, the abhava idea, is padartha, is something that is sustainable reality. For instance, just giving an example, that I have this pen in front of me. The one way of knowing this pen is to know this pen through visual perception, for instance. The other way of knowing this pen could be something through the absence of the pen, which is to say that wherever in the whole cosmos there is the absence of pen, this pen, there is no pen there, which would indirectly mean that pen will only be where there is non-absence of the pen, right? There is the absence of the non-absence of pen, right? Now, such models where the realistic school talks about the ideas, how do we even to understand the idea, how do we even know realities around us? That knowing is more of a conscious knowing, in the sense that whether, for instance, the things around me are realistic from realists point of view, or unrealistic from the unrealistic in the sense an ideal from idealists point of view. Do they have do they have capaciousness? Do they have sustainability of some sort or not? Right? Or is it that it is only humans who bring about any kind of sustenance in relation to things those are around us? Now, this is very important from one point of view. Think for a minute of this whole world. Let's say there is, the natural world is there, and there is not even a single human in this whole cosmos. So what would the situation have been of natural elements or the environment? That point of time, we would not be talking about the idea of the environment around us. Yes, that's why we're talking about the relationship idea of human and environment, because since we are sharing the same space, that is to say, nature slash environment around us, and because we are a part of it, and we are making use of natural resources all the time, every day, every minute. So how is it that we understand, for instance, all or develop the sensitivity of behaving towards nature, the natural environment around us, right? So many of these theories in Indian philosophical discourse, um, they would um, they would very in I would also say indirectly, or some elements of it directly, they would be very relevant in, for instance, talking about or understanding or developing, I would also say, the sensitivity towards the idea of nature. Say, last example before I stop is how much discourse has developed over a long period of years in Indian philosophy about the theory of self, the idea of self, for instance. Now, if one only tries to understand this idea that, um, wait, what does it mean? The self versus what? The self versus the other, of course, or to say the other self, right? I'm not a solipsist. I'm not, for instance, living alone in the world. I'm not the only person living in the world. But the only way for me to understand, let's say, in our relationships with other humans, whether it's my friends, my family, and so on and so forth, we can only know them, and we can develop sensitivity towards, in terms of feelings and everything towards them, in terms of us alone. Now, the example I would like to give here, for instance, is that, say, for instance, one of your friends is hurt or your family member is hurt. You really tell that family member, like, I really understand your pain. Now, when you say that, it is, from one point of view, it is not true that you're understanding any pain of that person, because you cannot really, that point of time when that person is going through, let's say, a certain pain, you cannot feel that pain. That pain is felt realistically by that person. So what you mean to say to that person is that um, I I identify with your pain. In other words, a certain point of time previously, when I have had the same pain, for instance, I invoke the same idea of pain within me, and I imagine, yes, how he or she must be feeling really right now when they're having that pain. Now, what I want to say, what I mean to say by this is that the only way for us to know and understand anything related to the other than us is that we develop our own sensitivity of all our experiences. Now, when that becomes the case, that we are we are very sensitive with respect to understanding these different feelings and different ideas of sentience or insentience and so on and so forth, then we try to be more sensitive towards others. You would have seen people around you, for instance, that somebody gets hurt and people could be indifferent completely, while at the same time there could be someone else there who is completely coming forward and trying to help and so on and so forth. And simple idea is that that person who is coming forward to help is more sensitive in terms of his own experience of the idea of pain, that he comes forward to help and so on and so forth, right? And that's why it becomes important to understand, say, um, uh, whether a certain plant feels pain or not, you know, are in terms of, yeah, are they sensitive to the idea of pain? Are they not sensitive to the idea of pain? And that is where the idea of sentience and insentience plays a very fundamental role in this discourse of environmental ethics, right? And of course, the duties that we as social human entities who share the same space, what are our responsibilities towards the nature? So here are a couple of, I think, three of the recommendations I have prescribed. I think two chapters from the first book. Other two books, these two chapters from these two books, you are welcome to read them as well if possible. But the first two chapters, there are, I think, chapter 3 and 4 will be circulated. So you should read the two chapters from this first book. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.